When you grow up in a military family, there's a certain pressure to join up yourself. When you come of age, my grandpa served in World War II, my dad in Vietnam, and Webbled red, white, and blue in the name of freedom. I've since changed my views on things like that, but you can't do much to change the past. I ended up joining the service in my junior year of high school, getting training out of the way in the summer between my junior and senior year. It was back in the late 2000s and early 2010s. So the military was all about throwing people all over the world. My first was in Germany, and then I got a little bit of time in Guam, but my last deployment before getting out was in Japan. I ended up in the Quagga Picture, a super nice place and good access to the city, and the mountains were not that far away. It was amazing to get to leave for a couple of days and go hiking with my good friends. The city was pretty nice too. And God, the food, everything was so fresh, it made coming back to food in the States feel like I was eating field rations all the time, and it was so cheap too, except Japan had a little more of a sinister side too. Usually when the sun set, I learned from a few locals working on boss when I got that some weird stuff happens on occasion, and just to roll with it and act as normal as possible. How a couple of them recommended that I visit a shrine and just make a prayer offering. I heeded their advice about 2 weeks later after my first couple of encounters, thank God. The first thing that I ran into was one of the more harmless spirits. I was still in my mid-20s at the time and not out of my partying days quite yet. You ever been to a karaoke room? Yeah, they're fun as shell, and the alcohol is usually included or super cheap. Get a few friends and have a few drinks, sing a few songs with the passion of Freddie Mercury while realizing you sound more like Yoko Ono, and have a good laugh at it. Now with the amount of alcohol included, it was very understandable that we got wasted. I don't think we finished up until maybe 1:30 that morning, stumbling out in search of food before heading home. Now there are a ton of all-night places around, which helps a lot, but I was too tired to really care about food. Luckily, it was super easy to get anywhere in the city, while you're totally sos. Thanks. The rail system and everything, it told the others that I was going to head back home, making my way back to the little apartment that I was set up in for housing a couple of train rides, and I was at the nearest station just a few blocks away, enough to walk in probably 30 minutes, considering that I was still hobbling a little, maybe halfway there, on a dark street. I saw a figure standing about 10 moy. They were small, facing the same direction that I was heading, so I could only see the back of their bald head. The gown it was wearing looked like their best. Monk, where some drunk mind immediately went to little monk, wonder if he's lost. Look, I know that the US teaches us to be cautious of people on the streets, especially at night, but after living in other countries, you learned that people are nearly as violently out to get you as in America. It was pretty common here for young kids to travel alone on trains, walk the streets, and even run errands for their parents. Bad things still happen, obviously, but most people were a lot more respectful of other human beings, at least so. Seeing a little kiddling on the street around 2 in the morning, I figured they might need some help finding home. There was a police station down the road, and so I approached the kid. The nearest streetlight at the intersection flickered, casting us into darkness for a moment in the absence of light. I saw a small blue light that the kid was holding. As I got closer, I finally spoke up. Either are you lost? Do you need help? I said it louder than intended. The kid didn't respond, and it took me a second to realize that I was speaking English, so they might not understand. Look, I'm not too smart when I've had a few drinks, so I decided to try again, even in my broken Japanese, the southern accent. I still couldn't shake from being born in South Georgia, and it wasn't a huge help. What's the word for lost? A hinu musin nath. The kid finally turned toward me after I got the words out. The little blue light it was holding grew brighter as it turned, illuminating their face. It looked normal for the most part, like a regular kid, but instead of eyes, there was one singular eye, massive in the middle of their face. That single eye was staring me now, and I couldn't move despite my brain screaming at me to get the hello out of the right leg, turned to jelly, giving out underneath. As if fell to the ground, barely catching myself before my head hit the concrete. I still couldn't move while the thing shuffled toward me, blue light oppressing me even further. As I sunk to the ground, trying to look up at that thing, it's something that I will never forget. God, typing it out makes it come back. I can still feel it, the thing leaning down toward me on the ground, looking me right in the eye and licking my cheek up to my temple. The tongue was scaly, with little points coming off of that scraped roughly against my skin. I had just shaved that morning, making it feel even worse. Closer to me, it was lie. Kia hat licking, but more slimy while still being rough against every small patch of flesh that it could reach. This little licked me, stood up and looked me in the eye and walked away like nothing had happened. I couldn't move, heart racing, trying to figure out if I was just so sedan attacked by somewhere in the street, or thinking that what Isa was some kind of ghost. After a few minutes, my strength returned, finally able to stand up and make my way back to the barracks. I couldn't fall asleep the entire night. I almost took a scaring pad to my cheek to try to get rid of the feel. Ink that had left to my skin, it was driving me insane. I must have looked like a wreck the next day. Not too surprised, a couple of guys from karaoke the night before must have noticed. Too, I was sitting with a few of them in the mess hall staring spirals into my soup absent-mindedly. "You're right, Matt," another soldier had asked. "Looks like you've seen a ghost." As Ed taking a minute to shake the fog out of my brain. "You ever sobered up from being absolutely ripped without an AP? You had sucks, like really sucks." I might have to be honest, who did your union to Rue, a local working with a sand base, asked. He was dozing off just moments before, but suddenly he was fully awake, a look of concern on his face. I don't really know, thought I was a kid at first, like I could only see them from behind, bald and wearing a monk's robe. I asked them if they were lost, and then it's like I don't know, like I just suddenly collapsed. I couldn't stand my feet, and then Nit looked at me and that thing had done as Ed babbling on and still stirring my soup. "When I was on the ground, though, it licked me. I don't know, man, I feel kind of violated," Russ snorted. Matt and I both unsure of what was happening as it began to turn into a full-throated laugh. "You got lucky. It's a Umaku Cyclops." Children, Hassad still laughing, their harmless thought they can be, while weird as you've experienced could have been worse. "I'm sorry, worse, it gets worse than being licked by a dwarf Cyclops." "Matt is going to need the lowdown here, boss." "Oh yeah, yokai can be very dangerous if you come across the right one. So you've heard of the Kuchizakana?" Wasp leaning forward. "There was an airman. A while back, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they covered his death as a suicide for his family. It was the Kuchizakana," thought the slit-mouthed woman. "I don't like the so undoff that," Matt said, turning away. "You should take warning." Rue said again, "If I your union to a woman hiding the lower half of her face, well then you found the Kuchizakana. She'll ask you if you think she's pretty. Oh, should I ask her out on a date?" Matt sked, snorting at this own joke. Rue only gave him addered side eye, used to his scrappy jokes by now. "Well, you can't run away immediately. She'll take that as calling her ugly and tell her she is pretty, and then she'll show you the lower half of her face." Mouth cut. He made a motion from one ear down across his mouth all the way back up to the other side into a huge grin. "She'll ask you the question again. Tell her she's not pretty. She kills you with huge scissors. Stella's pretty, then she'll slice you just like her. They found that airman with his mouth slit, so you're screwed either way." I meant that's kind of bad, as thinking back to last night, that was already awful enough. I didn't want to run into more. I just felt gross and my skin tingling again with the feeling of being licked. The best method for getting away from Aokai is to confuse. This goes for a lot of them, from the Kuchisaka on to the Maquesk. "Tie in return and you'll have time to run." Rue looked us both in the eyes now, like a command to take him seriously. "There are others to just avoid entirely. Run into some of the more vile ones, and you'll be well, as American says. Crude cool, never leaving the base again then." I guess, as I'd practically slamming my face into my soap. "Guess since I's a one, I'm going to be cursed. Now, not really, just got to a shrine and make an offering. It's easy enough, and it does wonders for protection." Rue said most are only restless spirits that couldn't move. On offering a prayer for them can often make them ignore you, or just to give you enough luck to avoid them. We chatted a little bit longer, Rue telling us about various local legends before split off back to work. I ended up getting swamped work for the next week, unable to get a moment to breathe, much less get off base. Eventually, the incident kind of got left behind. I think I rationalized to myself that I was drunk and just imagined it did or had a weird encounter. I should have remembered, though, about a week later. I finally got a night off, and so I decided to go and get some decent food, other than what was served at the mess hall, and so I headed into town to spit. Emi plans to be back before it was late, and the roads were deserted. I got caught up talking to a girl that I met. She was nice, and I still have her number, and we'd talk from time to time. We'd aid for a little while, but that was beside the point. By the time that I started back home, it was way past midnight. That said, this time, I was totally sober, so I had that going for me. At least I was also closer to the bases, so the walk was much shorter than before. Sounds like an easy trap, right? I walked the girl home and started back on my way. About a block away, I heard a woman calling my name from behind. Demi Thomas. I thought that it was the girl, maybe inviting me back to her houses since it was late. It would have been much better that way. But instead, it turned around and locked eyes with her. A tall woman, a long kimono covering down to her feet and a paper fan over her face, was standing just a few meters away looking at me. I almost fell back. Instinct telling me to run before I stopped myself, thinking back to what Rue had said. She kept the fan up over her face, approaching me slowly and gliding over the ground like she was floating under the kimono. "I pretty?" she asked, still star-eyed. Nanya deep into my eyes. I couldn't look away no matter how hard. It ried. Dark hair spilled on the sides of her face, big green eyes glowing while she stared me down. She was beautiful. Yes, very, as that almost compelled to say. It's Chalet Tout Eggle eyes lighting up. Even more, the paper fan started to close and a massive pair of scissors forming from the thin wooden jets. They glowed in the dim lights of the street, but that was secondary to what as a now. Still pretty chest me again, smiling literally from art ear. I could see her teeth and jaws on both sides, split skin folding. Back from the mouth, bright red blood was glistening around. The cuts as if they were freshly made. Her smile was making me uneasy, trying to think of a way out of this to confuse her, or even just run away. She iterated again. Is still pretty, you man, am I pretty? Is it unable to think of anything but the question that she asked me, immediately regretted that, closing my eyes tight and preparing to get murdered by a ghost. God, what a way to go. Are you pretty? She asked, wide smile now contorted by a frown in the middle. Blood gushed from the slits as her face furrowed. Quizzically, her hand holding the scissors had lowered her eyes, finally breaking from mine as she looked to the sky, pondering, are you pretty? Are men pretty? And once as she looked away, it was like a weight was lifted. I ran, finally making it back to the base gate, where the guards were a little unwilling to let me in because I was so scared. Man, that scared the hell out of me, though I didn't sleep again that night, and I called on the next day, and I told my commanding officer that I was sick with food poisoning. He marched my butt to the nearest shrine, and gave 2 offerings to whatever spirits wanted. Yet I was barely in Japan for a month, so art of these creepy spirits had already found me. It took every precaution I could from the non-hell. Is still that over a year at least for deployment at this point. After what Rue told me, I did some research too, and may know your enemy, right? Yeah, yokai don't play by the same rules as other ghost legends. These things could be pure evil, just that in the most distilled form. Some don't give a damn about any offerings, sore charms despite my newfound caution. It's like I was a freaking magnet for weird stuff over there. Things were only going to get weirder until I finally got a leave after the run. In with the Uchi Sakana, it took things a lot more seriously. If I was out at night, it tried sticking to more populated areas, and to be home before midnight, and then I made a weekly visit to the nearby shrine, and tried to do offerings to cover my butt when possible. It had worked for a couple of months too, though. I did make it a point to look into some of the more common yokai, just on the off chance that I run into any. It turns out that of the most public places can be dangerous when it comes to spirits, no matter how safe you're trying to be, and done of the most terrifying things about yokais that they simply don't give a crap about where they show up. It was around October maybe, and I had gone on for Anna's dinner with Hikaru, the girl that I had been seeing since my last encounter. It was nice. We walked through one of the parks at sunset. We were spending some menace time together. She was teaching me Japanese, so I was able to finally understand and conversate a little, but nothing beyond ordering at the restaurant. Usually either way, I was really falling for this girl, spending most of my time off boss with her. When I could, that was maybe around when I watched her back home, a little kiss goodnight, and then it was off to the train station to get back to the base. Sounds easy enough. And I was in a pretty good mood after a nice date night of relaxing and having a couple of drinks. The subway was a lot more empty than I had expected, with the train platform totally empty by the time that I got there. 10 minutes on the screen until mine got the reso. It took a seat in one of the benches to wait, pretty sure that I started drifting off the silence and flickering lights of the train station. A ling met to sleep. Scraping sounds made me jump back with a start, thinking that my train had finally made it. Looking up at the screen, thought there were still 5 minutes left on the arrival counter. The scraping was still going though, like something dragging along the rocks lining the tracks below. It got up to see, wondering if maybe somebody fell onto the tracks while I was asleep and I didn't notice. Wouldn't be the first time that somebody had tried doing this to themselves with one of the trains out there. Hopefully that wasn't the case, and it was just a drunken accident or something. I approached the edge of the platform, cautiously standing back before leaning forward to see that the source. The scraping sound grew louder, like it was trying to rush along the ground much faster than before and getting close. I didn't even see anything over the edge before a hand came up over the edge, grasping the concrete platform. Before another, the fingers were bloody, scarlets shining bright against the pale white skin. A mess of dark black hair followed slowly behind, pulling itself up from the tracks toward me. Look, it may have been kind of stupid during my last run-ins, but I've watched The Ring and The Grudge before, and I know that girls with messy long hair are a problem. Needless to say, I started stepping back fast, desperately trying to get away. The scraping sound got louder as she heaved herself up onto the platform, long fingernails clawing at the cleansmet, making terrible sounds. It looked at dark black eyes from pupil to edge, mouth wide, in a silent scream. When she was fully on the platform, I could see the source of the draggy noise. Her body ended around her abdomen, jagged bones sticking out of still bloody insides as she crawled forward on her elbows and hands, the protruding bone. Sess scraped the concrete below, making the awful scrappy noise and leaving a bloody trail. God, as it grew louder, it sounded like nails on a chalkboard mixing with a train running off the rails. My head was pounding and getting dizzy, just listening to it. It finally snapped out of it and got my body to move, running toward the other end of the platform and the small guard station at the top of the stairs. I had seen an older guy when I came through, though hadn't looked like he was in the mood to help. Hopefully, he would make exceptions when it comes to aid, spite being somewhat insha. PM the opposite of fast, so blowing out of the platform I hit speeds previously unknown to man. I could still hear the scraping behind knees. It flew by, desperately hoping to at least reach the stairs. That might slow her down. Yeah, nope. I did the classic mistake, went up against weird stuff, and I looked behind me after hearing the sound of scrappy metal joint, the ruckus. This chick was on her heels, a huge seath held in one hand now, but walking along at her hands faster than a circus performer. It might have been propelled further by the adrenaline, especially because her face was more clear now, frozen in a disfigured scream of shock, anguish, and tormented pain. I'll never get out of my mind. As she got closer, she switched to hopping along on one arm, raising the scythe to cut me down to her size. Maybe it was the offering that I had done a couple of days before, but I think something was looking out for me. I finally made it to the steps, bracing myself for the inevitable trip and fall. I launched myself toward them, trying to clear the first few. It worked miraculously, and her swing with the scythe went under my feet as I landed 3 steps up, grabbing onto the railing. Even with my newfound luck, I had to keep running, legs and lungs both burning by now as I shed to further up the steps. It finally happened. I knew my luck wouldn't last forever, but barely 2 steps further up the stairs, it dropped, smashing my face on the edge of one of the concrete stops. I dazed me hardcore, and I could barely get my vision back. I struggled back up, blood now gushing from my nose. All I could smell was blood, but the persistent sound of the yokai was gaining on me. I could hear the scraping turn to tapping behind me, getting louder as she pulled herself up the steps behind me. The jagged bones would drag up before flopping onto the next stop, gushing blood from the exposed insides of her abdomen. Every time it was pushed, and the sound alone made me want to throw up, but the trail of bright red visor behind her was something else to see. The train tracks behind her were glowing in the fluorescent lights above, looking more like the fires of with every sec. There was no getting back up, my head entirely messed up and barely able to realize which way was up. All I could do was clamber back on hands and knees, pushing myself further up the stairs. As she crawled behind for a moment, we made eye contact, making me stop. My tracks. Something burned into my mind. It wasn't my memory, but I saw it like I was living at a bunch of girls, just kids pointing and laughing at me, telling me that my parents didn't want me, so why should they? I was never going to contribute to society anyway, especially not since I was already one of the kids, forgotten to the system. It's pointless anyway. All this school that I've been going through only to get scolded by the teacher for being stupid, while the other kids laughed at me and they were right. I should contribute to the people around me in the way that would serve them all best. My vision flashed away, now standing right in front of the same platform that we were at, looking at the speeding train heading my way fast. One light was on the front, warm and welcoming as it started walking closer to the edge. The conductor blew the train horn, though. I'm not sure if he saw me. It would be too late if he did, because I stepped off right before the train came barreling into the station. I could feel the force of the train and wind as it knocked me back onto the train platform. As my vision faded, I looked back to where the train was stopped. Now doors open and people pouring out on their daily commute on the floor, looking up at all the people who would be better off without me. My vision faded as my last view was the jagged remains of my spine, jutting for where my waist should be. The train came screeching into the station, bringing me back from the terrible vision being forced through to memory than fear. I was in despair now, tears stinging my eyes and broken nose. They trailed down. She was gone, not rail of blood or scrapping sound in sight other than the train grinding against tracks, slowing to a halt. He ran even faster than I had, running away from her, diving right through the train doors and past Tackrod, waiting to exit as soon as they had opened. Can't say that I blamed them for giving out a little scream and flee, because I probably looked like a murder victim running from hell. Right then, cowering in the seat of the train car, I kept everything around me, waiting for her to inevitably reappear to take me, just like she was taken. There was one other person sitting in the car, younger guy dressed in casual clothing, wearing a baseball cap. He would side-eye me occasionally, though I was in pain in any mind. Despite everything, though, all I could feel for her was Adness, she had scared the crap out of Measure, but from the research that I had done, she was a lost spirit even after running into the slit-mouth woman before the Tikite, is still one of the most terrifying encounters that I've had. When I finally left the station, I caught a glimpse of what I think helped me get out. Olive, the guy in the baseball cap, left the station in front of me walking in the same direction outside. I wasn't far behind him, still stuck in my own little world, when he looked back at me giving a small whistle and away before suddenly disappearing like therein. Digani na splitsicon with that tiny bit of smoke or vapor hanging in the air, where he was through the smoke, his little creature scurry off toward the nearby trees, leaping in and disappearing just like the guy back in the States. I would have thought it was a raccoon running off from the bushes, as I couldn't place the thing and didn't for another few months until I was out camping with Hakaru and a few of her friends out in the mountains surrounded by trees. Shakaru and I were hiking a little ways from the camp to Vinsamahal one time, if you get what I mean, a little family of the same creature as I came running out of the bush a little ahead of us on the trail. 3 Tanuki raccoon dogs ran out and looked right at us before ducking back off into the brage. Hakaru made at the loudest squall that I had ever heard, a huge smile on her face as they ran off before telling Neil about how people thought they were legends at one time. Apparently seeing them was pretty rare, and event they are mischievous little shits. They're usually signs of good luck, so despite all the terrifying things that I've run into, at least I can say I've got a little bit of luck on my side. Unfortunately, that luck would only go so far, and Wes stopped going camping a few months later. It was summertime when we went camping again, taking advantage of the beautiful mountain weather to go with just a couple of friends. Me, Hikaru, Matten, and another newly arrived soldier named Jacob. We went up into the mountains on a Friday afternoon, everybody having requested leave weeks ago to stay up there until Sunday evening. We drove out to one of the mountain roads, barking off on the side and unloading the car. Cooking supplies and a decent amount of alcohol for a couple of nights out in the mountain air was exactly what we'll need. Edit. Hikaru and I were starting to get a little serious too, and I was thinking about popping the question, not marriage of course, but if she would like to either move back to the States with me or if I should stay here. When my deployment ended, I was ready to get out of this life, take a cushy job in the private sector, and put what I knew to use. I really liked her though, and I wanted her with me. The path to our camping spot passed by an old Shinto shrine in the woods, though nobody was there. Hikaru and myself walked in to do a prayer and offering to the kami of the land while Matt followed. Wetsuit out of obligation or superstition. I guess I had told him about my experiences even after the talk with Room. He still thought that I was egging him on and messing with them. Jacob turned his nose up at the idea of offering a prayer to the mountain spirits, saying that he didn't believe in Haji stuff like that. First mistake he made that weekend when we got to the campsite. I was honestly ready to beat the crap out of Matt for bringing this kid along. He was a dick to the highest degree, into just negative about everything that had happened. Even worse, Isa Wim got through at least 3 different snacks that we had packed for this stay, and he threw every bit of trash off to the side. After we had set everything up, I asked to Aru if she wanted to go for a walk, doubling back and picking up the trash left along the mountainside. He's kind of annoying, she said, when we were fair enough away from the camp. You're telling me I don't know if Matt's going to leave him out there in the woods at this point. Maybe we should go set up her own campfire. I went at her, making her blush and turn away. We got all the trash we found to sing it to near cycling bin or the main road and heading back to camp. When we got back, it was not ideal. Matt was trying to set up his tent while Jacob was making a general mess off things, pulling all of our supplies out with no rhyme or reason and scattering them along the clearing. Eventually, Matt got this tent set up, nudging Jacob and grabbing a couple of the fishing poles that we had brought along. They headed down to the river, hoping to catch our dinner before the sun started to set. Buckaroo. I stayed back getting a fire ready and prepping other parts of dinner. Plus getting our tent situated. We were both sitting in the tent, cuddled together and talking as the light grew dim. Outside, when Matt came running back, screaming through the trees, "Go, we have to go," he shouted, tearing through toward our tent and bursting in without any notice. Jacob carrying up behind him, screaming his lungs out in fear before dripping over some of that he had scattered when emptying out his pack. "The hell is wrong with you all?" I said at pushing my way out of the tent and stumbling to stand up. Matt was pointing the edge of the clearing in the same direction that they had just come from, where the sounds of something dragging itself along the ground was coming close. Oser trees were shaking, heavy thumps punctuating the dragging sounds. As it got even closer, a denser rattling. Sonic wind chimes knocking together grew nearer, clacking harder with each huge thud. I was having a flashback to the subway station at this point, hearing the sounds of the tech bond scraping across the concrete. I stepped out behind me, looking off in the same direction. We were frozen in place when the perpetrator burst through the tree line. I kid you not, this thing was a massive crawling skeleton. No, it was a skeleton made up of hundreds of smaller skull sand bones forming together to make one giant abomination that was now making its way towards us faster and faster. Every single mouth on the thing was open, a spy chorus of scream. Echoing for this, it made its way closer. Run. Aruzed grabbing my hand and going back to the direction of the car we hauled us, steering through trees and brush while getting cut by stray branches. The thing kept screaming and rampaging further and further towards us. As it reached out massive bony fingers to claw its way forward in the dirt, it was gaining fast with the car still at least a couple of miles ahead of us out on the road. Crap. Matt shouted, remembering probably the most important thing, where the key. She stuck his hand up, but Gotham just run. Jacob was screeching his head off behind us, the closest stone to getting overtaken by the creature. Hikaru was making better speed than I was, with her just to a few feet ahead of me, Matt leading the pack. The rattling got louder, the skull amalgamation shaking with jaws open, and another screech, every single face on it tetchoing as they glowed in the pale moonlight above. It made the dark sockets of the eye rays even more hollow, deep pools of black death that wanted us to join the mist. There any way we can get tried of this thing? I was shouting through my labored breathing. I hadn't had the misfortune of running into anything in Monsen. Now I was going to get flattened by a Halloween decoration in the middle of the mountains, the shrine. Hikaru shouted, pointing at the dim light of a lantern hanging down from it nearby. I don't know who came by to light it since we had been away, but thank God they did as we got closer. Jacob started screaming louder, the rattling speeding up in turn. We finally made it, Matt ducking in first with Hikaru and Eirik behind. She pulled me in behind her, almost slamming me back into the wall. Jacob tripped as she went up the low stairs, falling right on his face before the doors to enter. Matt stepped forward, trying to help him by grabbing his arm. Avinisha pulled Jacob, and something stopped the younger man from getting past the threshold. God, please, no, please, he was screaming at us right there on the edge of the door with only thin air between, but unable to cross the mass of bones. Suddenly swung a hand for forward, stabbing right through his stores. So with two long, sharp, bony fingers, it's cured him. Asha begged for help, voice fading as I lifted Jacob to its mouth, popping him like candy. The three of us could only scream, trying to push back to the furthest reaches the shrine, in hopes that it couldn't get through the door to shoo. Hikaru said, breathless next to me, they can't be killed. We just have to try and wait until it gets bored, maybe leave if it can't get. Thus our hopes that it couldn't get in were confirmed. A bony hand reaching toward the door, only to get repelled back with a flash of light. The gas Shidoka stayed out on the path, pulling itself up to level one. Huge empty eyes right at the doorway, staring in at us with every small skull dotting its mealing toothy grins. It was just going to try and wait us out, knowing that we couldn't go anywhere. It eventually let out another raspy scream, blowing hot breath through the doorway and blasting us with the stench of death. Hikaru and I held each other, trying to shrink back from the atrocious smell, but nothing helped. Matt was cowering in a corner, crying and begging for help from whatever god might be out there, the gas Hado. Kuru was getting impatient, though, every angry spirit that it was made of crying out for nourishment and blood. One long skeletal arm raised into the air, preparing to smash down on top of the shrine and just get rid of the barrier. We braced ourselves, eyes closed and crying as we expected to be crushed to death. Instead, the rattling started in earnest, only to be cut off by a heavy thump. Something crashed to the ground beside the shrine. Instead, I opened my eyes just in time to heart the Osadoka scream again and get hit with the deathly odor before it started rattling faster, making its way back down the path from where it had come, standing in front of the shrine. Now the huge skeletal arm clutched in one hand with a huge paper fan in the other was a huge man with sounds. Makes me paranoid that the techie might be nearby again, finally coming to finish the job. I don't know if it helps since I'm back over here, but I've taken to doing small offerings. It gives me some comfort, at least despite the terrors that keep coming back into my mind. Sometimes I think about going back to visit. I've even started talking to Oro again, catching up after nearly a decade apart and seeing how both of her lives have changed. She's talking about coming to visit the state soon. One wondering if I might be open to showing her the sides, who knows, and maybe I still have some of the luck from that tanuki hanging around. Small wings in his back. Asha turned. I caught sight of hardened eyes, exuding seriousness over a long pointed nose on its red face. Kami, Hikaru said under her breath as she stared in wonder. The man waved his fan, disappearing into the night with a gust of wind, and taking the arm with them. Just like that, the terror that was only feet away had come to pass. Our lives saved by an unknown guardian. We went back to the car because hell was staying out there when we just saw a damn giant skeleton at a man in one bite. There was no way that we were staying to figure out if the yokai would come back. Not like Command was going to believe us when we told them any of this. Matt and a made-up A story on the way back. Hikaru nodding along and putting it all to memory, and Jacob had started getting drunk more and more of and when Matt finally told him off, he got pissy and huffed and puffed off into the woods. We haven't seen him since then. Ken got the local authorities out for his search and rescue operation along the mountain, but the most they found was his fishing rod still thrown aside down by the stream. That was my last encounter while I was there. I stopped camping after that, even with the aid of what I came to find out was a Tangwa guardian deity for different regions. I wasn't eager to face that skeleton again anytime soon. We went back to base, and I kind of just absorbed into myself Hakaru, and I drifted apart over time. Even though we still keep up as friends, it just didn't end up working out. Had a family here that she didn't want to leave. And I had about enough of getting nearly killed by GH. Briefly we talked about moving off to another prefecture. But that idea just wasn't meant to be, so after about a month, we just agreed to break it off clean. That was that. I guess that wasn't well after what had happened. I don't know, maybe. I'm more open considering that I had more tame run-ins with my first yokai. Maybe he just wasn't able to handle the ramifications of what this could meant. The dude grew up a pretty hardcore Christians. So I can't imagine seeing a behemoth skeleton died a lot for his faith. They eventually gave him a medical discharge. Oh, I'm not really sure where he'd end up since I moved back to the States after my deployment was over. I'm still here now and doing my own. Indication I still have nightmares about my run-ins and event has slightest of scraping. Sounds makes me paranoid that the Teki might be nearby again, finally coming to finish the job. I don't know if it helps since I'm back over here, but I've taken to doing small offerings. It gives me some comfort, at least despite the terrors that keep coming back into my mind. Sometimes I think about going back to visit. I've even started talking to Horo, again catching up after nearly a decade apart and seeing how both of our lives have changed. She's talking about coming to visit the state soon. One wondering if I might be open to showing her the sides, who knows, and maybe I still have some of the luck from that tanuki hanging around.